story of Robin Hood. The tales of Robin Hood have been told around the campfires since the days when good King Richard the Lionheart ruled England. This is the story of how Robin Hood got his name, for he was not born with it. Robin was called Robert when he lived with his father and mother in a farmhouse called Locksley Farm. It stood at the edge of a great forest in the centre of England. In those far-off days, much of England was covered by forest in which the deer roamed wild. The nearest city to Locksley Farm was Nottingham. It stands today, but of the great Sherwood Forest there is not much left to see. When young Robert was but a lad, his mother died. Robert and his father were left to work the farm with the help of half a dozen workers. Robert's father had been a soldier before he married. He'd gone abroad to fight for his king, and his gallantry in battle had been rewarded when the king gave him Locksley Farm to live on. There, as well as learning how to farm the land, Robert of Locksley learned how to use the weapons his father knew so well: the sword, the quarterstaff, and the longbow. Young Robert learned quickly and well, and when he was only in his teens, he often won contests with the bow and arrow, which was his favorite weapon. In those days, there were many fairs where contests with the bow and arrow were very popular. At the age of 16, Robert won a contest at the great fair in Nottingham. Many highly trained soldiers competed against others, so it was a great success indeed when Robert won. It was then that his father said to him, "I believe one day the world will hear of you, my lad." But it was not as young Robert of Locksley Farm that the world would hear of him, and as yet no one had ever heard the name Robin Hood. King Richard the Lionheart went away with an army to fight in foreign lands. He left his brother, Prince John, to rule England until he returned. Prince John was a weak man who allowed the barons and the earls and greedy churchmen to grow rich at the expense of the poor. They taxed the people heavily, and when they couldn't pay, they took their lands and their farms. England was no longer a happy place to live when King Richard was away. There came a day when Robert's father died, and he was left to work the farm. He and the men who helped him worked hard, so they did not fall into debt. But many did, and it was common to see beggars and tramps on the roads and in the forests. They'd been honest men, but they'd lost their homes. Robin was walking through Sherwood Forest one day, on his way back to Locksley from Nottingham, when he chanced to see a deer standing in a clearing amongst the trees. Almost as soon as he saw it, to Robin's surprise, it dropped dead, shot through the heart with an arrow. Robin expected a soldier or one of the rich knights who hunted in the forest had shot the deer. But then he saw who it was. An old man, almost in rags, clutching his homemade bow, ran to the fallen deer and began to cut it into pieces. He worked quickly and quietly, for it was against the law to shoot the king's deer, and he knew it. Robin knew that too. He knew that if anyone saw the old man, he would be put into prison and maybe put to death. Robin crept up to him. "Don't you know it's against the law to kill deer in the forest?" he said, looking grim. The old man turned swiftly. "Are you going to arrest me?" he asked. "No, I'm not," said Robin, "but you'd better come with me, and quickly too, for if you are caught, you know what will happen to you." So the two men went together to Locksley Farm, carrying the deer with them. But later that day, a gamekeeper happened to see bloodstains, and he followed them to Locksley. Then he ran to tell his master, the Sheriff of Nottingham, who was no friend of Robin's. It wasn't long before soldiers arrived at the farm, accompanied by a wicked nobleman, Sir Guy of Gisborne, a friend of the sheriff. Sir Guy of Gisborne had had his eye on Locksley Farm for a long time, and now he believed the chance had come to take it. He intended to arrest Robin for killing a deer in the forest, and then to steal his farm. But Robin had seen the soldiers coming. Before they arrived to hammer on the door, Robin and the old man and all his workmen had left the house. Now they stood in the forest, all of them with their bows and arrows ready aimed at Sir Guy and his soldiers. "Are you looking for me?" Robin called out. Sir Guy spun round on his horse. He saw the men facing him with their bows drawn. Robin had his own bow in his hand, but he'd not drawn it. "I have come to arrest you, Robert of Locksley," Sir Guy shouted, "for the crime of killing a royal deer in the forest." Robin laughed in his face. "You'll arrest nobody this day," he called out, "and unless you and your men throw down their weapons before I count 5, you'll never again arrest anyone." Robin began to count loudly. 1, 2, 3. There was a clatter as swords and staffs and crossbows fell to the ground. Robin went towards Sir Guy and his men, followed by his own men who kept their bows drawn. "And now," laughed Robin, "since all of you have nicer clothes than we have, I think we'll have a change." Later that day, Sir Guy of Gisborne arrived back at his castle wearing the rough and simple clothes of a peasant, and all his men were the same. Meanwhile, Robin had taken from the farm all the things he thought he would need, for he knew that Sir Guy would be back, and with many more soldiers. In the forest, Robin stood on a hillock and spoke to his men. "For what we've done this day, my lads, we will all be classed as outlaws with a price on our heads. There's no justice in England now with our good King Richard away, and I'm sure that Sir Guy of Gisborne and his friends will not rest until we're dead. Well, for my part, if I'm to be an outlaw, then I will enjoy the life. This forest will protect us from attack, and there's food here for those who know where to look for it. And because there's no justice in this land, I declare it will be my chosen duty to fight for it. I will take from the rich and give to the poor, and I will defend any man who suffers from these greedy noblemen, who will suffer themselves when King Richard the Lionheart returns. Will you join with me?" A mighty shout of loyalty went up in the forest. Those became the first of Robin's merry men, and many more were to follow. Robin always wore a suit of Lincoln green with a hood, and so he became known everywhere as Robin Hood. His adventures have become famous the whole world over.